Right guys, another video for you, more content on Valve, Steam Deck and Batocera, or more specifically Batocera and lightguns. As of version 35, the developers have baked in support for all different types of lightguns so we can play these games on our modern flat screen televisions or monitors. The work the developers doing is nothing short of geek black magic. It works incredibly well, and it's obviously going to get better over time the more work they put into it and we see future versions of Batocera. I know what some of you are thinking, Hono, why would you use a light gun on the Steam Deck? That makes no sense, the screen is tiny. Well, of course you're right, but we do have the option of hooking the Steam Deck up to big screens by using a USB-C dock. That gives us HDMI out and we get those USB ports. So that's what I've done. I can hook it up to my 42-inch OLED television, use the USB port to plug in a Sinden light gun. And of course Batocera isn't just on the Steam Deck, it works on many other machines, whether it's an old laptop or a PC you have, or single board computers. The point of this video is to make you aware of it and clear up some confusion, because people have been spreading misinformation where they clearly haven't read the wiki and don't really understand what they're doing. I will do dedicated gameplay videos in the future. We'll visit some of these retro systems and their well-known games. Playing these games, frankly, is a lot of fun, and I want to get use out of my light gun. The first thing we're going to do is head into system settings and information. So you can see I'm actually on Batocera version 36, but it says dev. On the Steam Deck we only have the beta at the moment, so we expect bugs, we expect problems, we expect things to not work quite right. We tell the developers what's wrong so they can fix it, and we will in time get a stable release on the Steam Deck. But of course if you're using a PC you probably have access to a stable build already. We can see that my CPU model is an AMD custom APU, which is the Van Gogh architecture. Many of you will now realise, yeah, he's definitely using the Steam Deck. If we head into the controller and Bluetooth settings, you can probably make out just in the top left hand corner there's two gamepad icons and a little gun icon. If you want to use a light gun, you have a pad per gun. The gun is slave to a controller, so you want two guns, have two gamepads. This is how the developers want us to do it. It is the easiest way to get it done. We can see I've got Sinden gun settings because I've plugged in the Sinden light gun. Andy Sinden, who created the gun and the software, he's worked with the developers to get his gun working well in Batocera, and it does work very, very well. The gun works by having a camera within the barrel of the gun. It's looking for this white border on the outside of the screen. Now, depending on your display, you might have a curved monitor, so you might want to have a thicker border to help it make out that outline. It's depending on the angle you're at, because it's a curved screen, it might be thinner in some places than others depending on the angle that it's looking on. Ideally we want it to be as thin as possible. It doesn't really matter the thickness, because in Batocera it's not going to cover up any gameplay. It won't hide your health bar or your ammunition. It's all scaled down to fit within the border. There is a border mode which can be on auto, or you can tell it to only bring up this Sinden border when it's required in game. It's really up to you, and we can go through the recoil modes if you've chosen to get the recoil gun like I did. Now, as you can see, I've got a light gun games collection. I have got many systems on here like Daphne, so I can do the American laser games, but I don't want to have to go into PlayStation and scroll through all of these games to find Time Crisis. If I want to use my light gun, I'm going to use the collections, and that's quite easy to do. When we push the start button, we're going to go down to our game collection settings, and we want the automatic game collections, and we're just going to tick light gun games. Because we've scraped our games, we've got the metadata, we know if they're a gun or a shooter game, they can automatically show up. So as I go in here, it says 246 games. That's not 246 individual games. I'm going to have some games doubled up, maybe even in triplicate, because it was in the arcade but then it was ported to home console. So Operation Wolf, we have the arcade version, the NES version, and so on. I still think it's cool to see the different ports, and my friends might have played on one console to another, so it's just nice to have them there. We'll just point out, so Alien 3 the gun, I've got it for MAME as well as Final Burn Neo. MAME is multiple arcade machine emulator. It's for preservation. They're trying to keep this stuff authentic as it originally was. Final Burn Neo, they're not as strict. If they can find a way to get the games to play better, get better performance by changing game code, they will do that. So I think we can forgive them if it makes the games play better. So I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's all a matter of your perspective. But yeah, I've got all of these games available to just click and load from the one wheel, which is pretty cool. So let's do dedicated gameplay another day. We shall head into the wiki to RTFM, read the frickin' manual to understand what's going on. So as I just said, we've got our games, we've scraped them, we've got the metadata, we know if they're 1 or 2 player, what style of game they are. So we can see for Duck Hunt, it's brought up this little cursor icon next to it. Many people wondered what that was when it was added into Batocera. It lets you know it's a gun game. Doesn't mean you need a light gun to play it, but many of us would argue that's probably the best way to play it, and that's how it's intended to be played. So the fact we can use light guns is incredibly cool. Now they're letting us know that there are actually games that use the light gun in certain parts, like as a mini game, but we wouldn't really class it as a gun game. So they're giving us this optional gun games XML we can use to get those games omitted from our collection. So those of you that saw the video I did about getting Batocera on the Steam Deck, I was quite adamant we'd all do it the same way, and we'd copy our BIOS files and our games over the network using FTP software. We'd use FileZilla. Now I was told that was completely unnecessary, but I knew the day would come that we wanted to do something a little bit advanced, and that day is here. We want to get the gun games XML into a directory, a folder that you will not get access to if you do it the easy way. So because we know how to use SFTP, we can get that XML file in there. That's not the end of it though. We do need to open up the terminal to run the Batocera save overlay command. A couple of ways of doing this. If you've got the keyboard and mouse connected to your Batocera machine, you can press F1 and access the terminal that way, or you can do SSH. So with SFTP software, we have a host name, a username and a password to log into the Batocera machine. You can do that with SSH. So instead of FileZilla, we'd use, say on a Windows machine, the PuTTY software. Hostname, username, password gives us this terminal that we can type the Batocera save overlay command into, and once that's done, the changes are saved and we can reboot the Batocera machine, and the optional light gun games are now gone from the collection. Awesome. So we do have quite a few options, and this all depend on your budget, what you might already own, or your skills with a soldering iron and doing DIY projects. So there is the Wiimote as an option. There's a couple of ways of doing that. The Dolphin bar, which clearly isn't recommended with just the 1 star, or a powered IR bar. So that's kind of cool in that it's wireless, the gun, but there are little quirks to how it's calibrated, how the IR bar needs to be used, and some of the buttons on the gun don't work at the moment. But still, if you own it, even if you don't, it's quite cheap to do this option. So yeah, if it lets you play gun games, why not do it? We've got the Namco GunCon, so this is the composite, the component cable. This is the original technology for analog displays, the CRT. So these guns will not work on your flat screens. So it says they're second-hand, they're low availability. Here in the UK, I've looked on eBay, you can get loads of PlayStation 1 games, Namco guns, quite cheaply. If you wanted to do the gun IR option down the road and modify a gun to make it compatible with flat screens. So there's the Ultimark aim track, which also uses infrared technology. These guns have been around for quite a long time. Many people might have them already. They came with or without recoil. There's the AE light gun, which also uses infrared emitters that go around on your display. So that's an option. And there's the gun for IR. So many see that as the cream of the crop. It's usually done as a DIY option, but there are people that will make them for you. So when I say cream of the crop, these guys go above and beyond. They will source original guns used in the arcade that have the slide that moves with the recoil, and they modernize these guns so they can work on modern displays. I've chosen to go with the Sinden light gun. I was told I was wrong. I should have gone gun for IR. I'm not wrong. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted a very portable option, and the Sinden gun gives me that because it functions off a white border on the display. I don't need emitters stuck to my screen that I need to take off. So there's pros and cons to all of the options. You just need to be aware of what they are and what works best for you. But I can tell you now, the Sinden gun does work very, very well. So we get to the global calibration. We've already mentioned that for each gun, you want it to have its own controller that it can be slave to. That's what the developers want us to do. It is by far and away the easiest way to do it. Do not try to overcomplicate things going into the settings to try and change it. It tells us for the Wiimote gun with the IR bar that we have to cover up one of the emitters and then just have the other one sort of center of the screen. So if you want two guns, pretty sure you're going to need two IR bars. So yeah, they're saying that they might be able to get around this. I was reading on the Batocera Discord that in the future they're hoping they can avoid us having to do this nonsense, but at the moment, if you want to use it, this is the way to do it. Always read the wiki to make sure you're following the instructions to get things done right, or you are going to find you're going to have problems calibrating your gun. We know the Dolphin bar isn't really ideal. We'll just gloss over that. We've got the Namco GunCon. Many of us won't be using the CRTV unless you are like a proper retro gaming enthusiast. You guys should know what you're doing anyway, because you're clever guys. So we've got the Ultimark aim track. It's telling us the calibration information is saved onto the gun itself, so recalibration may be required if moving to a different display. So I mean, that would be true with the Sinden as well. They talk about the fact that if you have the recoil version of the aim track, to make sure that you do have a proper power supply for it, that you don't overload the gun. And we've got the AE light gun, which is still relatively new, I suppose, and I haven't had a chance to fill in the wiki to explain about this gun. We've got the Sinden option, which is what I went for, and we'll explain its pros and cons and why I went for it. So we do have a warning that says there's a hardware bug that prevents the use of multiple Sinden light guns on a single USB hub on some boards. So I only bought the one gun. I've got the Steam Deck. I'd like to use it on there because it's portable. I can just easily put the Steam Deck and the gun in a bag and I can just go to friends' houses and we can have some fun. But because I'm using the dock, plugging in those two Sinden light guns probably isn't going to end well for me, so I didn't want to waste money buying an extra gun. It might work, I don't know. Someone else will probably let us know in the future. But if you're not using the Steam Deck, if you've got an old PC you're using, you can plug one gun into the USB 2 port, the other Sinden gun into the USB 3 port to separate them out, and that should get around that hardware bug. It says the Sinden light gun setup. We connect the USB cable to the machine, hold left on the gun's D-pad for 5 seconds, which puts it into the calibration mode. So you'll have a cursor come up in the middle of the screen, which we can aim down the sights and shoot, and we're calibrated. It's incredibly quick. And yeah, as I say, so I've got a portable option. I have it set up at home. I go over to the friends and we set the Steam Deck up on their screen, just quickly calibrate the gun to their TV, off they go. We just need to keep a reasonable distance away from that screen for the camera to make out the white border that's put automatically around the edges. So we've got the Sinden light gun settings. We did see that very quickly when I was on the Steam Deck. We talked about the border size. Ideally, we want it as small as we can get away with. If you do have a curved screen, you may need to make it thicker. Just trial and error, see what works best for you. But just do keep in mind, in Batocera, all the gameplay is within the border. The border will not cover up any of the gameplay or your health bar icons, stuff like that. We do have the different recoil modes. The recoil on the Sinden is, his choice was questionable, we'll put it that way. So I went for it partly because I knew that the fact it had a capacitor and an actuator in it would add weight and it would feel like less of a plastic toy. I like that I do have the option of recoil, and I'm mainly going to play games like the old school Time Crisis or Virtual Cop, where I just pull the trigger once and I get the recoil and I let go. It gives time for the capacitor to build up its charge again. Where the recoil on the Sinden lets it down is if you try to do sustained automatic fire. If you're not into electronics, the capacitor, you can just think of it as a battery which doesn't hold much charge but does recharge very quickly. If we try to do sustained auto fire, it depletes it, and it just, the auto recoil just gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker till it's non-existent, and we need to let the capacitor charge again. So it's not ideal. If you're going to play a lot of games that you know is full auto fire all of the time, you're probably better off turning off the recoil. And those of you that didn't buy the recoil gun, you're now realizing I didn't actually miss out on too much. You don't feel too bad about it. There are different gun modes though. So the default mode is the gun mode. As you pull the trigger, you get your recoil, you get your clack. If you continue to hold that trigger down for full auto fire, there'll be a slight delay, and then it'll go into that full auto recoil and you'll hear the actuator clacking away. But as I say, it can't do that for a sustained amount of time. So we have the quiet gun mode, which is the same thing, just not as loud. And then there's a machine gun mode where it's rapid recoil, and we've got the quiet machine gun, which is rapid recoil, again, just less intensity. So if you want to save yourself some money, you can go non-recoil. You're honestly not missing out on too much. So there's the gun for IR. We said that's like the creme of the crop. So depending how much money you want to throw at it, what kind of gun you want to use, whether you want to get an old Namco gun, or you want to go all out, have all the bells and whistles, and try and source a proper arcade gun with a sliding recoil. That's very, very cool, but it depends how much money you want to throw at the project or what your skills are like with a soldering iron. But because we have to make those emitters that go around the screen, I don't really see it as a portable option. If you're having a static machine like an arcade cabinet, then that's fine. It doesn't really matter. You know it's not going anywhere, the gun stays with it. But because I have the Steam Deck, I really like the idea of the Sinden just being able to be plugged into my PC, unplugged, taken to a friend's house to use the Steam Deck on their display. It works well, but yeah, I may well do a gun for IR build down the road. We'll see how it goes. So we've got the emulator support. So we have our systems, obviously, and then each system can have multiple emulators to play the games for it. So we just need to make sure that the system, as well as its emulators, can support using light guns. So we see Amstrad CPC uses RetroArch, Caprice 32 doesn't have gun support. But if we do arcade, MAME, RetroArch, main versions, and Final Burn Neo, they all support light guns. Awesome. Right, so as we scroll down, the thing to point out, we've got PlayStation 2, so it says RetroArch PCSX2. There's no light gun support, but PCSX2, the actual emulator itself, you can get it to work with light guns. There's like a plugin. Whether this will get added into Batocera at a later date, I don't know. We'll have to see. I imagine it would, because there'll be some cool games on there we would like to play. So yeah, just be aware what you're trying to play and the emulators and what's supporting light guns. So we've got some exceptions. It says, although most light gun games will be plug and play, certain titles or emulators require extra actions, typically a calibration in the emulated game itself. These are limitations of the software and cannot be automated. So I did read on the Discord for Batocera that a guy has played all of the games, calibrated all of them, and they're hoping that they can actually do that in the future, that the games will essentially be plug and play once we do our initial calibration. But there's no promises at the moment. If you find that your gun is shooting off slightly to the left or whatever, it's probably because you haven't gone into the game settings to calibrate the gun. We do our initial calibration, but each game might need a little bit of tweaking. So it starts talking about if we're doing arcade games, this can vary. More often than not, you need a keyboard to get into the service menu to calibrate the gun. So we have the Flycast emulator, which normally does the Dreamcast, so we can do House of the Dead, but that can also do Atomic Wave. There's some Atomic Wave is an arcade board, arcade games. We also have some gun games in there, so we know how to calibrate for those. As we scroll down, we'll find that the PlayStation, we can only do GunCom compatible games. So some games weren't made for the GunCon. In order for them to work, we will need to get those games patched. So it explains how we can get that done. We can download the file. Instructions are in the file, respectively, for each patchable game. It says Area 51 has no known working patch. Well, that's not the end of the world, because it was available in the arcades and it is ported to other systems, so it's not like we will never get to play that game. We just can't do the PlayStation version. The Sega Saturn says in-game recalibration is required, located in the game menu options. This is different per game. This only needs to be done once per game though, so that's not a major drama. First time you play the game, just make sure it's calibrated. So it says for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the Justifier controller type does not work in Libretto MES or Libretto BSNES, rendering Lethal Enforcers unplayable with these cores. Again, not really an issue because you can just play the arcade version of Lethal Enforcers. It will look better than the SNES version anyway. So there's a per game testing spreadsheet, a list of tested light gun games that will update over time. So it's beta testing, bug finding, and workarounds are welcome on the Discord channel under developer guns or in the mega issues report. So I've already done this. I found on my Steam Deck with version 36 beta, and I tried to do the Daphne games, to do the American Laser Gun games, and the white border wasn't coming up when I load the game, so I can't use my Sinden light gun. So I told the developers, are you aware this is an issue? Maybe they already are, but now they know this is something that can be investigated, and then in the future hopefully they can get that fixed and I'll be able to play Mad Dog McCree and Crime Patrol, stuff like that. I've got the HD like remasters of it. They do actually look really good, so I'd love to be able to play those games. So there's a note about the controller type option. So essentially what we're boiling it down to is if we want to have crosshairs on the screen. Some people don't want crosshairs, they want to use the sights, look down the gun. Some people realise that actually gets quite tiring after a while, and they just try to rest the gun on their knee, move their wrist to move the cursor on the screen, and really use the gun more like an air mouse. So not saying you're wrong if you do that, if that's what you want to do, but you really do need crosshairs on the screen for that to be an effective method of playing the games. We get into the troubleshooting section, so they're going to talk about Wiimote issues, stuff to do with the Sinden light gun. If your recoil isn't working, just unplug the gun, plug it back in again. Issues if you've got problems with your second Sinden light gun. So we've already said you might need to have them on different speed USB ports. Say about your aiming accuracy being off, so we'll just iterate this again. You calibrate your gun, the general calibration, but some systems, some games, you will need to go into the game option. So Time Crisis on the PlayStation, the first thing you see is gun calibration. Other games like Virtual Cop on the Sega Saturn, you'd have to go in to the settings of the game and find the calibration to shoot the target and get your gun all synced up. Okay, so as I said, we can leave the gameplay videos for another day. I will cover these retro systems and some of their popular games. It's a lot of fun. The Sinden gun I found works incredibly well. I will do Windows on the Steam Deck as well, because I'd like to do Technopower. They are the more modern light gun games. So if you go to an arcade now, they're basically gaming PCs. I think support for that will come to Batocera, so I wanted to have a Windows install to be able to do like Sega's Golden Gun and Time Crisis 5. So there'll be videos of that coming in the future as well. So let's leave it there. Have a great day, have a great evening, whatever you choose to do after watching this, and as always, I shall see you when I see you next. Ciao for now.